and welcome to the Martin Luther King Jr. Memorial Library, Washington, D.C.'s main branch library. I'm Kirsten Mitchell, president of the D.C. Open Government Coalition. I am thrilled to be here in partnership with the U.S. Open Government Secretariat to talk about open government efforts at all levels, from global to local. Before I preview our time together this afternoon and introduce Daniel York, Director of the U.S. Open Government Secretariat at the U.S. General Services Administration, a few words about the coalition. Tom Sussman, who is with us tonight and whose name is synonymous with the Federal Freedom of Information Act, founded the coalition in 2009 when he convened several dozen community members, and they found enthusiasm for formalizing advocacy and public education efforts around open records, open meetings, and government transparency at the local level here in the District of Columbia. We're an all-volunteer group of journalists, past and present, attorneys, civil servants, and community leaders who are watchdogs to ensure that the district government lives up to its promise enshrined in the law, that, quote, all persons are entitled to full and complete information regarding the affairs of government and the official acts of those who represent them as public officials and employees. So a few quick notes about how we do that. We monitor activities at the DC Council, testifying as an advocate for transparency. We do community outreach, offering hour-long training sessions online and in person. We help individuals who need help navigating the FOIA process. We request advisory opinions from the Office of Open Government, whose director, Nicole Allen, you will hear from this afternoon. And when necessary, we will sue, going to court to enforce FOIA and open meetings laws. Before I go over our agenda real quickly, a quick note, this event is nonpartisan, and that really delights me because in these times of hyper-partisanship and partisan tribalism, it is refreshing to embrace an issue that should show no favor. Transparency quite simply transcends partisanship. So we're going to start with a 30,000-foot global and national view from Daniel York. Next, we'll zero in on DC and hear from DC Auditor Kathy Patterson, who is also a three-term DC Council member who has been a true friend of open government. She'll set the stage for us with a brief history of transparency here in DC. And then a good portion of our time together will feature a panel moderated by Tom Sussman, the coalition founder, and we'll hear from Director of the DC Office of Open Government, Nicole Allen, the first public records advocate for the state of Oregon, Ginger Quintero-McCall, and longtime media lawyer, Robert Becker. But first, let's hear from Daniel, who has spent the last decade at GSA, including as Director of IT Transparency, and the decade prior to that as an IT specialist at the Department of Justice, the U.S. Department of Justice. Quick note, when asked what his current job as Director of the Open Government Secretariat entails, Dan likes to say he, quote, to make this nation of ours more open, transparent, inclusive, and responsive to all the citizens we serve. So over to you, Daniel.
Thank you. All right. So another scheduling note, this meeting is being recorded and is on the record. The meeting recording will be posted to the GSA website, hopefully about a week afterwards. It depends how long they get approved and such. Great, so next slide, or first slide as the case may be. That's me. Great. So open government, right? So hi, my name is Daniel York. I'm the director of the U.S. Open Government Secretariat at the U.S. General Services Administration. Those are a lot of words to say that really I'm here to do what I can to help the government be a more open, transparent, and participatory place, right? We can't possibly do better as a government if we don't ask the people what we can be doing better. And so I'm going to be talking a little bit about the Open Government Partnership at the beginning, and then moving into open government at the federal level, and then closing out with what my team does specifically. So the Open Government Partnership is an international organization. Next slide, Laura. Yep. 77 countries, 150 state, local governments, some 400 plus open national action plans, all with the purpose of trying to make their federal, local, state, tribal governments more open, transparent to the people they're there to serve. So it's not just here in the US, but it is a global effort. I'm going to go to the next slide. Keep it quick. Again, more time for the. Each nation, each entity, local, federal, state, et cetera, are required for doing national action plans or local action plans. The idea is that every 2 or 3 years, you write an action plan with civil society to take on ambitious goals of how to become more open and transparent, right? Whether those are big topic things that need congressional approval or small topic things that need, just linking two databases that can more easily be put together and sorted and figured out. So all of these things are happening, and that starts with the co-creation process. I'll be talking about our 6th national action plan and how local government can be involved in that, to implementing that the plan itself, including their 5th national action plan, which we'll be touching on as well. Evaluation, how do we do the things we said we were going to do, and then learning from what will obviously be mistakes in the process, and hopefully making it better for the next cycle. Next slide. So I want to talk a second about the PPCE commitment. Hopefully this week, if not next, the White House will be releasing a PPCE, Public Participation and Community Engagement Framework for public comment. Our hope is that everyone here takes a look at that. This is actually pretty revolutionary. The idea for doing this came out of an earlier piece of work. And then as we received feedback, as the White House received feedback, thousands of comments, they wanted to actually then create a framework to help direct U.S. agencies on how better to do public participation through their processes. So this should be coming out. I was hoping it'd be out already. Let's see where that is. But next slide. So within the U.S. context, right? So we're a member of the Open Government Partnership. Within the U.S. context, there's 3-4 agencies that play a role. There's the White House Office Science Technology Policy to help with the policy things between federal agencies. GSA, we handle the domestic implementation of open government, and then state and USAID, which handle all the international facing stuff, right? So that's all the grants and all the international stuff is them. And then we handle all the domestic facing national action plans, events like this, and many others. Next slide. That's my team. So I'm up there on I guess my right, your left, I suppose. I help run the team. I handle the NAP5 coordination. Yvette, Alexis is in the back room, help with our NAP6 process. Laura is also in the back room. She's our lead on engagement and public engagement activities. Arthur's are the designated federal official of the new Open Government Federal Advisory Committee. It's a lot of words to stick in one sentence, but it's all there. And then Beth, who's on detail from NARA to help us out. So we each have a role to play. Next slide, please. So our 3 big pieces of work, right, is NAP5 implementation. That's taking what the White House released in 2022, implementing as much as possible, updating statuses. Then there's the NAP6, which I'll be talking about in a second, our 6th national action plan that's going through, we'll be going through development here. We have an RFI out on the street right now, trying to gather input from the public on what we can include in the national action plan. And then some of the Federal Advisory Committee will be working on as well. And then third is events like this. It's gathering federal stakeholders, state, local stakeholders, the public in general, to talk about open government and talk about how we can do better at doing better. Next slide. That's sort of where we are. We got a long tail here for NAP6 I talked about. The RFI closes, I believe it's November 12th. And there'll be so this deck, it should already be posted online, but we can share it as well. Next slide. So NAP6 RFI is out. I'll answer my own question there. We really do want your feedback, right? Like the only way we can do better is by receiving that from the public. And so we really hope you will take the time to let us know how things we ought to be including in the NAP6. it's going to go a long way, and that those results of the feedback will actually be then given to the advisory committee, which will then provide recommendations to GSA. Next slide. Excellent. Big areas of NAP6, right? Problem identification, opportunities to build on existing networks, innovative approaches and resources recommendations. These are all, you'll find them in the Federal Register notice, but this is sort of put in a prettier format for you. Next slide. Federal Advisory Committee membership. So the Open Government Partnership, what they want nations to do is to have a multi-stakeholder forum, right? Where the public can come to government, they can co-create a thing. It's challenging in our US regulatory environment to be able to do that, true co-creation. There's the Federal Advisory Committee Act, which its purpose is to prevent oil barons from writing oil policy, airline executives from writing airline policy, et cetera. And so it's challenging to co-create with the public in a way that's inside our regulatory environment. The closest we can do is with a Federal Advisory Committee, which is why we've gone through the process to set one up. So this will be acting as our multi-stakeholder forum for the purposes of OGP. Next slide. And here I just listed out what we'll be working on, right? We'll be starting with our NAP6 recommendations, moving on to how better we got other things we can throw on, including challenge commitments and other things. There is a virtual session this coming Friday, the 18th. That's our first administrative meeting. And then our first public in-person meeting is the 23rd. I think the next slide is the people themselves. Nope, not quite. Everyone can reserve input. This is more about the meetings I was just talking about. So then we'll go to the next slide. There's the people themselves. These people are selected to sit on the Federal Advisory Committee. The same list is on our website. It's literally a copy and paste. But these are all the folks. I know some of them had registered to be here today as well. And I think that might be close to the end for me. Events, excellent. So these are the public events we've worked on since we were stood up this time last September. As you can see, we've worked with a number of civil society organizations, Washington State, the City of Austin, the DC Open Government Coalition, who was very kind to let us sit on today's session as well. And then I want to put out a call if you or someone, an organization you work with, would like to have a similar session, something we can help organize and support, please do reach out, because we'd love to host more of these sessions in places not only in DC, but in other parts of the US as well. And then I think the next is my call to action. Yep, you want to join the listserv? Where's again, the deck is online. It'd be easier than writing down that very long email address. But you can click on that and join the listserv. And then you can keep up to date with the various goings-ons, things we've posted, upcoming meetings, etc. Next slide. And then follow us on LinkedIn. Yep. There we go. I think that's it. Just a thank you. All right, back over. Any questions, maybe? Am I allowed to do questions? Is that a... Mr. Howard's got a question. I can see it in his eyes. He's got that gleam. I've seen this before.
Thank you for all this work that you've done for people who haven't seen all the great Secretary has done and don't know about it. As you laid out the NAP6 there's a gap between when this National Action Plan finishes at the end of this year and when the next one will be ready. What should people expect your team to be doing next year with respect to following the existing work, and how can people interface with and understand what the government is doing? That's
a great question. So the question, because the recording may not have picked you up, was what are we doing in the gap year that the OGP allows between when National Plan action ends and the next one begins? So I may have mentioned that our 5th National Action Plan is set to end here in December. I think it's December 28th, as I recall. And we have a year from that to get the new National Action Plan published and out the door, which inside itself is a challenge, but we're going to work towards that end. So we're going to spend that year doing the RFI. There'll be additional opportunities to participate in the creation of the National Action Plan and underlying commitments in the Federal Advisory Committee. We do plan on publishing the draft National Action Plan for public comment next summer, so that even after they've seen that being recommendations created, the public can again comment on sort of the semi-final product. And then we got to go through the internal approval process to get it posted and whatever the new administration is.
What would you say the most important commitment is that the U.S. has delivered on in this 5th National Action Plan? And what impact would it have?
I would have to think about that. The most important or most impact we've had, there's certainly, I mean, there's 70 subcommitments ranging everything from anti-corruption to posting White House visitor logs to NLEADS, the FBI's I shouldn't say the FBI, the DOJ's process for making sure enabling hiring officials, federal law enforcement officers to know of poor conduct before they're hired, right? So like the things that were included in NAP 6 are vast. Most countries have 8 to 12 commitments. The White House saw fit to include 70 subcommitments in ours. So there's a lot in there. Some of which will be easier to actually finish than others. I would say, I would have to get back to you on that, Alex. I can't think of any, I mean, there's so many.
It would be useful if the public could know out of these commitments, which ones have had a direct impact and transparency and accountability.
Great.
The one you referenced about the police misconduct database is not open to the public.
It is not.
But if people are being prevented from getting hired, that would be a great impact to know.
Yep. I see another, you have your hand up, ma'am? I thought I saw you raise your hand. That's fine. I'm sorry. All right. Any other questions? I'll turn it back over to regular scheduled programming. Thank you.
Thank you, Daniel. Daniel mentioned NARA. For those of you who don't know what NARA is, it's the National Archives and Records Administration, and that's actually where my day job is. I'm actually the designated federal officer for the Federal FOIA Advisory Committee. It's my pleasure to present to you DC Auditor Kathy Patterson, who was confirmed to that important position by the DC Council in 2014 and again in 2023. As I mentioned earlier, Kathy served 3 terms on the DC Council, representing Ward 3 in the upper northwest quadrant of our city, winning election in 1994, 1998, and 2002. And among her many accomplishments was helping to bring DC out of the financial crisis in the mid-90s and effective oversight of executive branch agencies. Council reforms she initiated included the legislature's annual performance hearings, authorization for special investigations, and a separate council budget office. She came to the office of the DC Auditor after working for nearly 8 years as a federal policy director and as a director of government relations for Pew Charitable Trusts. Kathy is a former newspaper reporter, as am I, and she is also a past president of the DC Open Government Coalition, serving at that helm from 2012 to 2014. So over to you, Kathy.
Thank you, Kirsten. So I'm going to give you a very, very brief history of recent history of open government in the District of Columbia. And I can summarize that by saying 2 steps forward, 1 step backwards, although sometimes it feels like 2 steps forward, 2 steps backwards. So progress made and progress lost. I was a new council member in 1995, and very early on, one of the early months in my tenure, we got our first FOIA, and it was from Steve Toomey, a columnist at the Washington Post. When this arrived, I believe by email, I can't even describe how offended I was. I got this guy on the telephone and I said, look, withdraw the FOIA. You withdraw the FOIA, you can have what you want by the end of the day. He wanted a list of low license plate numbers, my list. If you don't, you will get it on the last minute, the last hour, the last day by law. I can give it to you. Ask for it nicely. And he did. He withdrew his FOIA. He got what he needed by the end of the day. And I like this anecdote, and I followed this process in my current job as well. Somebody sends me a FOIA without first asking simply for information. I'm probably a little more polite than I was to Steve, but I basically say, look, FOIA is your last resort. Ask for the information. It's public information. But this also illustrates what I think is and continues to be the single biggest challenge for those of us who support open government, and that is the officials, the person at the desk you meet and the person in the corner office, all that whole range. Everybody thinks government documents belong to the government. And there's a lack of understanding that the government is all of us and it belongs to all of us. And trying to get that through people's head is very, very difficult. If you're used to working at a desk and you have all these papers on your desk and you think they belong to you and not to the world. Kirsten read from one of the things we did in some of our FOIA amendments. I chaired the Government Operations Committee for 4 years, and we did a couple of rounds of FOIA amendments in that period of time. Probably the most significant thing we did was bring the council under the Freedom of Information Act. Up until that time, the DC Council was one of roughly then half the state legislatures that were not covered by the law, and we brought the council under it. I don't believe everybody quite understood what we were doing, but we did get it done. But also added the public policy at the beginning of the FOIA law that Kirsten read from, that said it is the public policy of the District of Columbia, all persons entitled to full and complete information regarding the affairs of government. There's also a wonderful thing in our FOIA Act that says, here are all the things that shall be made public. Period, shall be made public, including everything to do with the budget, all the requests for budgets from agencies that go through the CFO, all that stuff is supposed to be made public on request. Virtually everything to do with contracts should be public on public request without going through the task of filing a Freedom of Information Act. I'll give you another anecdote, open meetings anecdote. Fast forward to 2003, Robert Bobb was a new city administrator in 2003. And when he came to Washington, D.C. to work for Mayor Williams, he had been city manager in Kalamazoo, Michigan, Santa Ana, California, Richmond, Virginia, and in Oakland, California. He came into his first mayor council breakfast meeting where all the elected officials of the District of Columbia were sitting around a table, a meeting that we're about to shut the doors against press, shut the doors against the public. And he looked at me and said, "Can you do that?" He could not believe that these meetings were closed. And of course, they didn't stay closed for very much longer. They were opened up after I left the council in 2007. Finally, I understand, I heard just tonight that perhaps there's a move afoot to try to close them back up again. That's what I mean about that 2 steps forward, 2 steps backwards. Open meetings was something we tried to do, I guess, again, reform of my last year on the council, 2006, and we lost open meetings legislation on a 6-7 vote, sending it back to committee. It was tabled and sent back to committee. But in the following year or two, my successor, Mary Cheh, and then council member Muriel Bowser were open government advocates and supported the open meetings legislation. I'd like to turn to some of the questions that Kirsten gave me. One of them, what lessons from the past can help inform next steps? Transparency needs a leader, more than one leader if you can find it. I think I provided some of that leadership, at least for a period of time, but we just don't have that right now. The council has enacted transparency legislation affecting both the police department and the Office of Unified Communications in the last 2 years. But these laws have not gone into effect. The council hasn't ensured that they have been implemented. I can tell you one of the things that we did in a report, we looked at officer-involved fatalities. One of the recommendations we came up with was for the police department to make public their use of force reports, their internal affairs reports on each fatality that they reviewed. Chief Conte at the time pledged that they would do so, and they finally did. They were very abbreviated reports, but they had information on them and they were posted. Then came a police union complaint and an arbitration decision that said, no, these invade privacy, even though there were no names, invade privacy, and so they were taken down. We then got the council a year ago to enact legislation to require them to be published. That law took effect, I think, right after the 1st of this year, and it is still not being followed. That's what I mean by the council not ensuring that the steps they take are implemented. Another question, what is the role of leaders? A good question. What's the role of leaders? What is the constituency for open government? If officials, in the most cynical view, only support it when transparency serves political advantage? That's a very good question. Mayor Bowser was a champion, doesn't seem to be a champion anymore. She was as a council member. There should be a cost to politicians for opposing open government. And one of the things I would suggest DC, the Open Government Coalition, consider is coming up with a rating system for candidates. I will never forget all the work that I was put to as a candidate in 1994. And Dorothy may remember this in 1994. The Gay and Lesbian Actress Alliance was the most effective advocacy organization. They put candidates through their paces. I was writing letters to Congress as a candidate. I did all this stuff to try to get their rating because I was running against an incumbent who was great on these issues. Anyway, they put me to work. because I wanted to sort of neutralize my, my opponent. But my point being, make it pay if you oppose open government. And one thing to think about might be some kind of a rating system, because if you are loud enough with your ratings, candidates will pay attention. What's my agency's record on using our authorities? We have a lot of authority. The auditor's office is in the home rule charter. We get, the word is all, we get all things in the district government, we get access to them, and we have subpoena authority. In my nearly 10 years, I've issued one subpoena, and then we didn't have to enforce it because we got what we needed through an email search instead. And I've threatened at least 3 other times. So just having the authority is really helpful. Another question, is public information underused? I think it's underused by the council. The council collects all kinds of information. The council, when they're moved to do something, sometimes require a report and then do nothing with the report when they get it. I can give you another example. The council created a child fatality review committee. I think my first term there, it had been a mayor's order to have a fatality review committee. We created it in statute and built into the statute that the council would be required to do a public hearing on the annual report of this very important committee. Subsequently, fast forward, I'm the DC auditor. We had an audit report on the CFRC's work. We dinged the council for not holding that hearing. In the years since that report came out, the council changed the law. That hearing is no longer required. And that's that 2 steps backward. How am I doing on time? I can keep going through some of these questions, or we can break and go to your next part of the agenda. So let me know.
Another question or two.
Okay. A standing body on modernization or reprisal of the 1999 reports on the council. The council, there are 2 reports done on the DC Council that were published in 1999. One was done by DC Appleseed and one was done at the council's request by the National Conference of State Legislatures. Some of you will, with long memories, will recall that we had a control board, and the control board had management reform studies done of virtually every major agency in the government. It occurred to me that it might occur to them at some point to do a management reform study of the council. So I went to Linda Kropp and said, look, NCSL will do a study. We can get them to come and they can do it, do what we want, study the council, give us ideas for improvement. And she wasn't really enthusiastic about it until she learned that DC Appleseed was going to do a study of the council. So the NCSL proposal went back on the drawing board and we had 2 studies done. And they were incredibly helpful in lots of ways. Lots like it helped dampen down the number of emergency bills. There were just a lot of things that came out of that. I approached DC Appleseed 5 years ago about doing a reprise of the study they did in 1999. And there was great interest on the part of the previous executive director, Walter Smith, and the current executive director. But Appleseed likes to work with the entities that they are studying. And so they wanted to be sure that the council would be supportive of doing this, and talked with the council's leadership, and that study has not gone forward. That's something I hope folks in the community will continue to press Appleseed to do that, because I think there is interest in doing that. And I think that would be a very smart thing to do, and I would strongly recommend it. So let me see if there are any other questions to throw my way. I'm happy to take them. Robert.
Thank you. Should there be an update or amendment or whatever, or national clarification that the freedom of Information Act requests shall be treated equally? When I say equally, I mean it shouldn't matter whether or not I am a private citizen, a representative of a union, representative of an organization, or a member of the press. The request, any and all requests should be treated equally, and they should not be a priority to the Washington Post as opposed to Robert Branner, or to the police union as opposed to a civic association. They all should be treated.
I believe that's what the law states today. In practice, they may not be treated equally, but at least as far as the statute goes, that is what is required. And the other thing that's required is that a Freedom of Information Act, once it goes forward, should be made public. It should be available publicly. Some of the lawyers here, like Robert, are probably more familiar with the actual wording of the code than I am, but I'm pretty sure that that's correct.
I can tell you from a community perspective, they're not treated that way. They're not received that way. did not receive that.
I don't dispute that, but insofar as the law can be of assistance there, I think the law is fairly consistent. So we just, again, need to work on that implementation of the law, enforcement of the law, and frankly, respect for the law from the outset. But thank you very much. Thank you for the opportunity to do it.
Thank you so much, Kathy. I loved what you said about lack of understanding that the government is all of us. So our panel is getting situated now, and while they're getting situated, I'm going to quickly introduce them. Tom Sussman, I've already introduced him a little bit. In addition to being the founder of the DC Open Government Coalition, he is also strategic advisor for global programs and government affairs for the American Bar Association. He previously served as director of governmental affairs office at ABA and associate executive director. He was a partner for nearly 3 decades with the Washington office of Ropes and Gray and spent more than a decade on Capitol Hill. I got to know Tom through his 4 terms on the Federal FOIA Advisory Committee, and I learned something new about him today, and that is that he is a former member of the DC Library Advisory Board, which I think is a very appropriate thing to mention given our location tonight. Nikhil Allen, here in the middle, is director of the DC Office of Open Government, and last year was reappointed by the District of Columbia Board of Ethics and Government Accountability. Prior to that, she served as Senior Policy Advisor and Counsel for the District of Columbia Office of the Chief Technology Officer, where she was instrumental in implementing DC's open data policies. And she also served as an Assistant Attorney General in the District of Columbia Office of the Attorney General. Ginger Quintero McCall in the red was the first public records advocate for the state of Oregon, and she's going to talk about that today. Ginger has worked both inside and outside of government on FOIA and privacy matters. Inside the government, she's been affiliated with the Federal Communications Commission, the Department of Labor, and the Federal Emergency Management Agency. Outside the government, she's been affiliated with Demand Progress, Electronic Privacy Information Center, and Sunlight Foundation. And like Tom, Ginger has served on the Federal FOIA Advisory Committee. And last but not least, Robert Becker. He is an attorney in the district focusing on media-related legal issues, including access to government information. He's a member of the DC Open Government Coalition Board since its founding. And he has worked on bills to create the DC Office of Open Government that Nikhil leads, and to strengthen the FOIA and Open Meetings Act. And Bob has another bill up his sleeve, which we'll hear about shortly. And he is also a former newspaper reporter and editor, and previously worked at the Reporters Committee for Freedom of the Press. So, Tom, over to you. And I'm going to ask that you swing the mic around.
All right, this is good. So I think having had Kathy's legislative history was very useful because while this panel is technically called Establishing an Information Technology and Transparency Reform Commission, it could as easily be called It's Time for DC to Come into the 21st Century. As Kathy indicated, 2000 was overhaul of DC FOIA, some major, I'd say that's 5 steps forward. 2010 was Open Meetings Act and the creation of the Office of Open Government. That's probably 3 steps forward. And since then, nothing. A few steps backwards, a few steps sideways, but no real progress. And so one of the things that the DC Open Government Coalition has gotten on board with, and Bob Becker has been a principal address person and mover, is to use, I guess, like it's the Police Reform Commission or Criminal Justice Reform Commission model of a commission, an entity that would look at transparency, FOIA, government information technology, and come up with recommendations to the district. And so I really would like to sort of start with that, Bob, and let you, why do you think we need a commission? Why can't the council do that on its own?
Thanks, Tom. Well, I'm somewhat cynical about after 25 years of working on open government in the District of Columbia. When I look around, I see a mayor who is not particularly interested in transparency. I see leaders of the DC Council who are not particularly interested in transparency. There are people on the council who are, but the leadership is not. And so, and an agency attitude that it has customers that it serves. If it's the planning or the Office of Buildings, it's the people who file permits, without realizing that the public needs to know about those permits too. They are just as much the customers of that agency as the people who are actually trying to get permits from it. And so when agencies look around and say they see this statute that says you have to publish these things affirmatively, or you have to respond to requests for these things, it says that takes up time that we could be using to serve our customers. And we can't serve our customers if we're taking up time doing this. So I look around and say, okay, we need transparency. We know the bottom line is that the public needs this information, but there are other problems that prevent them from getting it. One is that attitude, but the other is the district has a lot of antiquated computer equipment that may not be capable of doing what needs to be done to make it transparent, or is capable of doing it, but it takes a lot of work to make that happen. So the problem is it's a labor problem. So knowing that the leadership is not interested in transparency, but modernizing its technology so that not only can it do more to be transparent, but also to make the lives of its employees who have to do all this work for their customers. I looked around and said, okay, let's talk about putting the two together. We could propose a commission to look at transparency. We're not going to get a lot of interest in that from the council or from the mayor. But if we say, let's talk about what is the information environment in the district, how can we improve it and make transparency built into that improvement? In Connecticut, for example, the statute, their open records law requires agencies when they buy new technology to consider transparency in the RFP that they put out to get the equipment. And so, but here, agencies go off and buy systems that they think will serve their customers without even thinking about it. And so each agency has its own thing. And so building a system, an ecology of IT technology that has transparency as a part of it, I think is a major issue.
So, Bob, you touched on an important point, which is the politics of transparency. And if you go back in many countries, including the initial Freedom of Information Act, when there was a Republican administration, the Democrats in Congress were calling for more openness. And then all of a sudden, there became a Democrat in the administration. And as everyone knows the story, Lyndon Johnson wasn't so happy about the Freedom of Information Act. And I think that repeated itself in the district. As indicated, Muriel Bowser was the author of the Open Meetings Act and the Office of Open Government creation while she was a council member. Not so enthusiastic about transparency as mayor. And that's not a political comment, that's an observation. But Ginger, you've walked in those moccasins of as first public records advocate in the state of Oregon. What were your responsibilities? How did that work? Is that a model that we should think about?
So first, just a little bit of history, why that office was created. Governor Kitzhaber, his fiance had a consulting business, and she was benefiting from her ties to him. And this became publicly known, and there was a bit of a scandal about it. Meanwhile, the governor and and his fiance were both conducting their public business on personal email accounts. And the press got wise to that too and started asking for some of their emails about this corruption and about this scandal and about her consulting business. And the Oregon DOJ, interestingly, had found out that these two individuals were using personal email to conduct government business and had asked to back up at least the governor's emails on the Oregon DOJ servers. So a public records request went to the Oregon DOJ for Governor Kitzhaber's emails, personal email address that was being used, but it was being stored by Oregon DOJ. And the governor's office sent a request to the DOJ, the Oregon DOJ, to delete those emails and not to reply to the public records request. And once this came out, it was kind of the coup de grace, and he actually did have to resign the governorship. So in stepped Governor Kate Brown, who had previously been his deputy, I think. So she came in after he had resigned, not by way of election, but just by way of succession. And she, working with the open government stakeholders, decided that they needed to do something about the open government situation in Oregon. Now, Oregon had, at least at the time, a failing corruption score on the report card for many reasons. But they decided they wanted to try to do something about this. So they set up the role of the public records advocate, which was meant to be an open records ombuds office. And as part of that, they also created the Public Records Advisory Council, which was, I call it the PRAC. That was supposed to govern the public records advocate. And the public records advocate was supposed to provide training on public records laws to both members of the public and to government. I was supposed to mediate public records disputes. And also, as part of the Public Records Advisory Council, which governed me, I was also supposed to issue occasional reports, biannual reports, or biennial, every 2 years. Now, the way that the office was structured, it was supposed to be independent. It was sold to the legislature and to the press, to myself, who moved across the country to take this job, and to the public as being an independent entity. It was the way that it was a multi-stakeholder council. The PRAC was a multi-stakeholder council. Unfortunately, all the members of that council were appointed by the governor's office, but the council was supposed to hire the advocate, and the advocate was ostensibly supposed to report to the council. Now, it didn't really end up working out that way, but that was the mandate of the office and the structure that was created for it.
So you said it really didn't work out that way.
It didn't.
Tell us a little bit, because you're back in Washington now.
I am.
And, I think we all feel independence is an important element for such an office, and we'll get to Nikhil shortly on that issue as well. But I take it that there was, you were lacking in the kind of independence you felt was necessary?
I would not say that it went well. I arrived there in May of 2018, and as the public records advocate, I was supposed to be the chair of the PRAC, of the advisory council. And that advisory council, again, it was a multi-stakeholder council, composition set by statute. So there were supposed to be members of the press, members of the public, members of various government agencies. And I was supposed to chair that council. And the council was tasked with coming up with reform proposals. And I showed up here from DC, having worked in open government, and I was very ambitious. I wanted them to make such drastic proposals as there should be 4 basic annual reporting requirements for government agencies, including how many requests did they receive, how many fee waivers did they deny, how many requests were actually completed by the deadline, and how many requests were still not completed after 60 days. That was a revolutionary proposal for the state of Oregon. Now, any of you who are familiar with the federal FOIA will know that there are, I don't know how many data reporting points in the annual FOIA reports, like way more than that, I think, like many, and we continue to add more. So I showed up in Oregon and I pitched this idea to the council, the PRAC, and they actually were amenable to it, as long as we exempted localities and cities. Okay, fine, we'll take it. It's a compromise. We'll get state agencies at least to do some basic reporting on public records performance. And so we put forth that proposal, and then the proposal that the PRAC be made permanent because it had a sunset in the original piece of legislation. And for that, I was called into a series of meetings with the Oregon governor's office and told that I was not supposed to, I should, quote, be less ambitious. That was exactly what was told to me, and that I was supposed to be preferencing the governor's interests over the interests of the council or the public. In fact, I was taken to task for allowing that compromise to exempt out cities because that was what got us unanimous consent on the council. So I shouldn't have allowed that because that put the governor in the awkward position of then having to stand up herself and say that she didn't like this piece of legislation, this proposal. So I was told explicitly that I serve the governor's interests. I was told that actually the governor's general counsel was my supervisor, which I was surprised by. Nobody had told me that when I was hired. My understanding was that the council was my supervisor. They were the ones I reported to. And then at the end of the meeting, I was told to not tell any of the reporters about this meeting. So that was delightful. And just to paint a picture, at the time I was literally 9 months pregnant. So it would have been very difficult. I had moved across the country to take this job. It would have been very difficult for me to just resign the position. So I was put in the impossible position of having to carry water for the governor's office while not disclosing it to the council because the council has members of the press on it. But that was what I was supposed to do. And I'm not supposed to reach compromise positions that might actually pass in the legislature. So that was the first meeting. And then there were a series of other meetings. And unfortunately, and this is a structural problem that we'll get to, but the budget for my office went through the Department of Administrative Services, which was one of the governor's agencies. The Department of Administrative Services had to approve the budget for my office and any budgetary proposals. So they cut my budget. And I took that fact to the advisory council that was supposed to govern me. And for that, I was summoned to another meeting where I was told that I was not to tell the advisory council about things like that. I was not to send any more emails like that, advising them of the fact that my budget was about to be cut. And again, it was reiterated to me that I worked for the governor's office and they are my supervisors. And it was intimated that my performance perhaps was lacking. So in the face of that, a few months later, I resigned in protest and
Came back to Washington.
came back to
Our game.
Washington.
Our game.
So
Well, you've just told a great story of how not to set up an office. And I usually in these kinds of discussions, the government official goes first. But I've saved Nikhil for last, and we'll go around, continue to go around, but I say for last because frankly, her office and her activities represent the 5 steps forward. And it's unusual in that she's not independent of the executive and yet has done a hell of a good job occasionally even standing up to the executive. She doesn't have independent budget authority and yet the council continues to recognize the importance of the office. So what's your secret?
I would say with district government, it's definitely a delicate dance that we have to do among the council and the executive and independent agencies. My focus since coming into this position is to build the office. When I came in, there was myself, one attorney and an IT specialist. Now we have grown the office and we have a new physical office, which I was able to negotiate with the executive to get. We have 3, I would say, line attorneys. We have a chief counsel, we have a paralegal, and we now have an IT specialist. So we've grown exponentially since I've been there. We also have an administrative office that we share with the Office of Government Ethics that services the office. So I have made it my priority to create an agency that's going to last. Of course, there are problems within the government with transparency, but we are here to be able to address those. That's why we were created. We take our job very seriously. We don't have all of the authority that we should have, in my opinion, to bring forth a transparent government. But at the same time, I focused on making sure the government officials respect our office, that they can come to us for advice, that we are not here as a gotcha agency. What we want to do is to make sure the law is followed, we educate, and make sure people understand the importance of transparency. I know, again, that we're limited in what we can do from an enforcement perspective, but we've worked within the framework that we have to make sure that we're a force to be reckoned with.
So I would note that you do have enforcement authority under the Open Meetings Act.
Correct.
And exercising that authority by your predecessor was probably the shortest trip out the door.
was it shorter than mine, though?
So you said, and like I'm quoting you here, I don't have all the authority we should have. Would you elaborate on that? Because Bob is very
Yes.
interested on what authority you think you should have.
Well, one of the things that we were able to get the council to do is to raise the fine for violations of the Open Meetings Act. It's only to 500. We asked for 1,000, but it's a step forward. To bring a case under the Open Meetings Act, we have to show a pattern or practice of going into a closed session. What we would like to say, what we asked for a change was willful violation. That was not granted, but we'll try again in the next council session. With respect to FOIA, we give advice, but there's really no teeth there for our agency. You mentioned Connecticut, how we have a board of ethics and government accountability. It would be great if that board has some authority over FOIA, if they could make some decisions. Right now, it is the mayor and the mayor's office of legal counsel that you can go to if you have a FOIA request denied and appeal before you go to court. But that has proved difficult because they have a large backlog. And also they don't always resolve it in a manner that's
Consistent with the law.
consistent with the law. Thank you.
I said. So, while we're talking about your office, what kind of issues do you, especially for you, give for your advice, both formal and informal? I guess two questions. One is, what kind of issues come most often before you? And do the agencies usually fall into line when you advise a requester that the agency ought to be giving them this information?
I'll give you the legal answer. Depends on the agency. But yes, I mean, they do respect our opinion. We do give them a legal opinion on what the law is and what they should follow. We act as an unofficial ombudsman, and we try to resolve disputes between FOIA requesters and the agency to the best of our ability. What we see as far as FOIA, we see a lot of requests from agencies for, what is the exemption that I can use? That's usually the question we get from the public. It's, where's my stuff? Like, I'm not able to get my records. What can I do? What are my rights? Those are the types of things that we receive, and we receive those pretty frequently.
And that's very helpful to the public. Ginger, you talked a lot about sort of structure and politics, but surely you had some substantive engagement with the public in the ombudsman function of your office. What kind of issues were there? I'm just trying to sort of get a little bit of comparison.
So I did, I think, several hundred mediations while I was there and a lot of trainings. I was hustling. I was going all over the state for these trainings, and I was hearing again and again the same issues, which are probably the same issues that you're hearing about. Overcharging of fees. The fee provision in the Oregon statute is very nebulous. So fees were often just a prohibitive cost for requesters. Delays, the sort of my own little fiefdom attitude that, we were talking about a little bit earlier, the people in government who don't think that it's their job to do open government. And, these were the sorts of things that I had included in a few of my reports, and, the reports were on behalf of the PRAC. And I think that being able to do those reports, and this is sort of getting to the proposal here, I think that being able to have those reports where you actually talk about the systemic issues as opposed to just playing whack-a-mole over and over and over again with the same systemic problems. I think it was really useful to be able to put those down in a written report and say, hey, we have this issue with fees. Here are a few examples that I've seen in the mediation. We have this issue with delay. Here are a few examples, and just sort of use the mediations and the trainings and the conversations I was having with the public to be able to put forth more comprehensive policy proposals that would address systemic issues.
Bob, did you want to make a comment?
Yeah, I wanted to talk about the 3 steps back after the 5 steps forward, because Nicole has done great stuff. But when the Office of Open Government was created in 2010, it was an independent body with a director appointed to a 5-year term. And at close to the end of that 5-year term, the director went after the Commission on selection and tenure of administrative law judges for violations of the Open Meetings Act. And he was the chief administrative law judge, went on a political attack against the director. She lost she was not reappointed. He is now the director of the mayor's office of legal counsel, which is responsible for adjudicating FOIA appeals. He is also was responsible at the OAH for not publishing opinions, that thousands of opinions annually that administrative law judges issued, and the MOLC has not published any FOIA appeal opinions since 2018. So what's happened, and in the process of that, the Office of Open Government lost its independence. Nickel was appointed to a 5-year term, and then the Office of Open Government was folded completely into the Board of Ethics and Government Accountability. And at the end of her 5-year term, she is now an at-will employee of the board. So we had an independent body, but we couldn't keep it in place. And the Board of Ethics and Government Accountability doesn't really have very much expertise in transparency and isn't interested in transparency. And so we would, to fix these problems, we would need a separate board and an independent body.
Can I speak to the independence issue? Because it was really kind of the crux of my experience in Oregon. So like I said at the beginning, the position that I was in Oregon was supposed to be an independent position. And there were certain protections that were put in place so that it would be independent. I was appointed by the governor, but could only be removed for cause. I had a 4-year term. I was supposed to report to the advisory council. Now, on my way out after my resignation, and was a front page story for a solid couple of weeks, we actually did get a piece of legislation to make that independence more robust. And part of that was the financial piece, was ensuring that the budget of the Public Records Advocate did not have to go through the governor's agency. It was ensuring that the Public Records Advisory Council could actually introduce its own legislative proposals or advocate for a legislator to introduce those proposals on its behalf, because prior to that, that council had to have the governor's office introduce its legislative proposals to the legislature. And guess what? If the governor's office didn't like the proposal, if there was a little too much transparency in that transparency proposal, it was not going to get introduced. So those sorts of pieces of independence, and then also just saying very outrightly in the statute, let me read it off. The Public Records Advocate is an independent office within the executive department, separate and distinct from any other state agency. That was the language that we got added after I left, and that was the language that I advocated for. It took a couple of legislative sessions, so I want to give everyone hope. Sometimes your bill fails the first time, sometimes it fails the second, third, and fourth time, and then eventually you get what you want because the system gets tired. So yeah, we did. Yes, yes. You just have to be persistent, but we did get that independence enshrined in the statute, and I think that's very important.
No, that's good. Now, I want to get back to you, Bob, because when we first started creating this program, discussing the bill, I referred to the proposal as the Information and Transparency Commission to study the issue of creating a commission. And I think you and Fritz both came back with emails saying, no, it's information technology and transparency. And then I said, well, isn't information include technology? And Bob Becker said, no, it needs to be separately emphasized. Why?
Because it needs to be emphasized, because in order to make transparency work, the system has to be built to do that. FOIA, if information systems were built properly, FOIA would be a very low-cost process for the government. But because they are not built properly, agencies are still operating like they have paper records, even though they've got electronic records. They have to go back manually and redact things. They have to go back and find things in different ways that are often hard to find, because records that are responsive may now be electronic, but there are still a lot of paper records out there that haven't been digitized, they haven't been preserved, And so you still gotta do that paper search sometimes. So the whole thing is to get a system that both meets the government's need to keep track of its own information, keep it secure, make sure that it's retained for the amount of time it has to be retained. And at that point, theoretically, at least, it's disappeared or jettisoned or archived somewhere. But the point is, it's a whole range of things that go from the creation of information until it's used either by the government or just disseminated to the public.
That's not likely to be done by our current Office of Technology within the District of Columbia, Octo. That's a setup question.
And all I can do is sort of laugh.
So, Nicole.
Yeah.
If the legislation goes through, would you like to be a member of the commission, and where would you suggest they start? By the way, I didn't give you that.
He is a member by.
Yeah, but
The budget, I think that a lot of the problems in the district come from how we allocate our funds. And when it comes to record keeping, we need to have money to be able to do these things. The commission itself should have a budget to be able to do what it needs to do, also have a staff. So I think you have to start there. One of the things I would ask for my agency is for independent budget authority. The Office of the Inspector General has that. I don't think you can be as effective as you can be if another entity is holding the purse strings.
and FOIA would be on your list?
FOIA, yes, absolutely. And I think that comes to technology. A lot of the problems the district has with the record keeping in general could be solved with a consistent, up-to-date record keeping system and computing. We are, as a district, looking into artificial intelligence now. So we are collecting, yes, it is laughable. But this is where we are. So we collect all this data. We have it. It's available for use for new technologies. If we do it properly, a lot of these problems could be solved by automation in the government across the board, but there has to be a financial investment. There has to be transparency in the process, and there has to be a will to do it, a political will.
So we talk about the political will, the chairman of the council has not been a big friend of open government, freedom of information, except in rare occasions where he can't get information himself and he wants to legislate access. And I'll tell you, one of the reasons that Fritz will remember the story of the two of us visiting Chairman Mendelson's staff person to try to talk about, opening up. I think at the time they had just removed any thought of adding FOIA to the charter school legislation. They added open meetings, but not open records. And the staff person told us that Mr. Mendelson was not a fan of freedom of information, that he had received a request for all of his emails mentioning Donald Trump, and that his staff printed them all out and took a big black marker to go through to redact anything that shouldn't be released to the public. And that, I guess, scarred him for life in terms of, if that's what freedom of information is all about, I don't want to have anything to do with it. And by the way, the Open Government Coalition mentioned the subject of using emails, personal emails for business. We brought the lawsuit against the DC Council, and they settled by agreeing that they would not use personal email for purposes. So
They'll probably just use text messages instead.
well, that's it. That's the technology issue that Bob is going to get us involved in. Let's have a round of last minute comments, and then we'll take questions and sort of open it up. So do you have anything you want to add that you haven't covered?
I mean, really just looking at the proposal that is before us, I think it's an excellent proposal, but it's really going to matter who is on that commission. and who is in the leadership position on that commission. I mean, everybody has heard there are a million commissions that accomplish nothing. If you want a commission that's going to accomplish something, you're going to need to make sure that the composition of that commission is actually people who want to accomplish something, not people who want to stonewall. And you're going to have to make sure that there's someone who's chairing that commission that's going to push things forward ambitiously.
I vote for Nikhil as chair.
Thank you.
Cannot be under this bill.
Well, that's fine. I'll relinquish that, I promise. I would just like to thank the folks in the community for supporting the Office of Open Government and our work. It's meant a lot to know, especially the DC Open Government Coalition, that you are there and that you raise issues that we're able to address. So we hope you will continue to do that. We are supportive of this legislation. In our best practices report that will be coming out this year, we will be advocating for it again. We continue to be a voice for transparency. And again, we appreciate all of you for supporting our office.
Thank you all for attending. One of the biggest problems we have in the District of Columbia right now is there is basically no FOIA enforcement, because the appeals from denials of FOIA requests go to the Mayor's Office of Legal Counsel. It has jurisdiction to order subordinate agencies to comply with the statute. But there are something like 50 or 60 independent public bodies in the District of Columbia. And to them, the Mayor's Office can only issue advisory opinions. They are independent bodies. The Council of the District of Columbia is subject to FOIA. The Mayor's Office cannot say anything to them. So for a large segment of the FOIA requests that are denied, the only effective in air quotes, means of getting redress is by litigation, and litigation is expensive and slow. And one of the things we need is a central body that can order every other body in the district to comply with the statute. Until we have that, we will be in serious problems. And the Board of Ethics and Government Accountability can do that with ethics, but it has never been willing or tried to do it. It doesn't have the jurisdiction now to adjudicate FOIA. So it can't do it here. So that's one of the major things we need to build.
So let's move to open questions, conversations. I think, do you want us to, someone to come up to the, can you get them on the, on air from the, okay.
Repeat the question.
Okay, we can do that. All right. Yes, ma'am.
I'd like to ask Bob a question and you possibly. It's not clear to me when you read the legislation what this commission would do and whether or not it would exist side by side with VEGA and the Office of Open Government. And I have a follow-up question.
Okay, this commission would be created to make recommendations about a capital project to improve the information technology of the district, to write new laws, to write new regulations, or at least recommend what should be in those things. And so it doesn't serve the function of the Office of Open Government or of OCTO. It is there to advise on how those organizations should proceed and how perhaps the Office of Open Government should be restructured so that it can do the job that it needs to do. So that's, does that help?
Well, my second question has to do with, I've had occasion since VEGA was first established and the Office of Open Government was first established, and then more recently, to have firsthand encounters with both offices. I wanted to know whether or not you or Tom have really rolled up your sleeve to see what the office is, and more importantly, isn't doing, and that it has the authority to do, but it's not doing.
You know, we watch the Office of Open Government. We are litigating against OCTO at the moment over trying to get data on FOIA request processing over the past 10 years. And so, yes, we are monitoring what they're doing. And we are talking to both bodies about what they could do better. And we are going to the council and talking to them as well.
Our experience with the Office of Open Government has been actually quite positive. We've asked for advisory opinions, which we've gotten some pretty strong ones. So maybe it's just that we're a favorite customer.
That's exactly the point. You're the favorite customer. What has been the experience of the average person who goes to a beggar meeting? Goes to beggar,
Well,
or goes to
don't-
the Office of Open Government? It's not the same as
Okay,
your
don't
experience.
blame Nicole on Vega. But if you're having problems with the Office of Open Government, here she is afterwards. We can have a few snacks and you can,
She knows what I think of the office. She already knows.
well, do you want an opportunity to, on the record?
On the record, I guess I will say that I have not been willing to exceed my authority. It is what it is. I will follow the law as far as to customers. We do our best as a group to make sure we address everyone's concerns and provide equal service to all people who come to us for assistance.
Well, and as this panelist suggested, we would like you to have more authority. So that, yes, ma'am.
I have a question for Ginger. Hi, Ginger. I wonder in your experience if there's a lot of like gatekeeping going on, and would you tell us if gatekeeping is actually now rampant, or in so many different state agencies, that it's a problem, and then maybe they're addressing the issue so we can be welcome on different issues that, important.
If I'm understanding correctly, by gatekeeping, you mean just kind of obstruction, right? Yeah.
There's some gatekeeping that's happening.
I think there's a fair amount of that. I mean, there are a couple things that are happening, right? There are the people who truly don't understand the public records law, who don't know that it's their job. There's the asymmetry of information. The people inside know more than the people outside, the requesters. There are technology issues, there are search issues that, your public records officers don't have access to all of the agency's documents. They have to reach out to a subject matter expert and say, hey, search your email for these 20 terms. So there are all of those issues, but yeah, there is a certain amount of bad faith that happens. I saw it, the city of Portland is known for it. There were other small jurisdictions. It was a lot of times on the local level, not on the state level. It was the sort of my own little fiefdom. I don't have to answer to you. Why do you think I have to answer to you? I think the solution to that really is eliminating barriers to entry, like eliminating fees. It's creating deadlines. It's creating a real adequate appeals system. So like Bob was talking about, it's creating the ability for folks to litigate, and creating that sort of accountability. The other problem that was happening in Oregon, which I suspect is also happening here, is when you live in a one-party rule place, all of the people are on the same team, right? They're not going to exercise oversight over each other, which is why you have to have, at least some amount of robust oversight, separations of power, hopefully multiple parties that are fighting against each other to actually win offices so they care about what you think. But yeah, there is a fair amount of just plain obstruction.
We'll come back to you. Yes.
It's nice to see you're taking up this issue of overall authority of information. I was in Octo a few years ago as special counsel, and we were facing internal issues. People were, for example, refusing to share data between the agencies under ephemeral issues like HIPAA, that Department of Education couldn't see mental health data, et cetera, et cetera. One of this, and we were working on enabling legislation to cover most of this. One of the things that we came up with, and maybe use this as compare and contrast, was to specifically localize ownership of the data at a specific point. That the data could not be owned by Octo, even though Octo oftentimes provided an indication of their own data. The agency should own the data. We wanted to locate the ownership in a deputy mayor or some other point where we could focus all the efforts, and that individual point of authority then could be held accountable. Have you thought about things like this? Has this come up in the framework, or anybody else that have reacted to this?
In our litigation against Octo for the processing data out of FOIA Express, they have claimed that we needed to go to the individual agencies to get that information, when in fact FOIA Express is a piece of software that they own and operate, and it is clear they are clearly the record custodian. So whatever you did, it seems to have worked, because they're not claiming ownership of the data they in fact own.
Data inside the government.
Well, I mean, who's the records in FOIA terms, who's the records custodian?
I think you have to distinguish custodian and legal control. However way you want to frame it, ownership, legal authority, whatever. Octo should not be involved in the waters of who has ownership and access. They should be a mere functional factotum.
And in the data policy, each agency was making decisions about its data sets. Okay. But again, we're talking about FOIA Express, which they have owned, and they have refused to even let Nickel be involved in working on and finding a replacement piece of software. So they have frozen her out, even though perhaps she should be the one because she gets a lot of requests from people or complaints. She should have access to that data, and maybe she should control it. But they won't even let her near it.
I'll say that Octo has maintained the position that the agency itself has ownership of its own data, and it's merely a warehouse. So that's still Octo's
We'd
position.
like to take it up one notch above Octo and above the agency. Let's say here is a point that can issue orders.
That's a good subject for the commission to look into. Alex.
Thank you. The DC government has innovated with technology. They adopted a brand new messaging platform, WhatsApp, that forgot to include record keeping for it. I've seen historically, DC, federal, state governments, they all adopt new technologies to do their jobs, but unless the procurement specifically says you have to have the records be able to get out, you have a problem. This goes to your question about modernization, right? If you've got mainframes, you've got tapes, you've got archaic stuff that you have to ask the NSA for a special reader to get off of it, and you have a problem. And DC government has mainframes still. Is it useful to put the two together in a commission, though? And is it useful? It's so clear that this coalition, you all have a vision of how DC government can and should be reformed to strengthen FOIA, to add capacity, to give her an independent office with independent funding, to improve the FOIA so that it specifically encompasses modern disclosure requirements. Is it useful to say, let's fund a commission, let's study the problem, and then put out a report that a future mayor will ignore? Because in this city, we keep seeing reports come out, the mayor doesn't do it. You just heard a report about this at the outset from the auditor. Why not reform the FOIA instead of studying the problem?
There have been a few commissions that have resulted in action at the local level. One of them, as Kirsten indicated, I was on the Mayor's Blue Ribbon Commission on the DC Public Library System, looking at possibility of a new library in what city center now. Look at the library renovation, renaissance in the District of Columbia, including this building. The Law and Police Reform Commission, with a budget, professional staff, they got some of the things done through that. That was one of these 3 steps forward and 2 steps backwards ones. So, I mean,
Is that your best pitch for why to spend money on this versus after-school lunches or more police or other things that people are concerned about?
I think if you want a reform that's actually going to be a lasting reform, you have to take the time to make it a well thought out reform. And it really will depend on who's on the commission. I mean, I will tell you that the question of what technology you have and what kind of records retention you have in place and what sort of search tools and AI tools you're using to actually deliver those records to the public is very important to FOIA. I think it is actually crucial to the proper functioning of FOIA FOIA, especially since we have a proliferation of government records now, more than we would have had 50 years ago. So we have to find some way to organize those and deliver them to the public in a way that's actually meaningful.
Alex, we have tried several times to get FOIA legislation through the council. We have been able sometimes to find a council member to champion that piece of legislation. Unfortunately, that council member wasn't the chair of the committee that dealt with FOIA. In fact, there is no committee that deals with FOIA because the chairman has kept it in the committee of the whole. There is no agency that's responsible, so there is no oversight. So that's a bit of a problem for formulating new FOIA legislation. But the commission we're proposing is 21 people, at least a majority of them have to be from outside the government. The chair has to be from outside the government. It's made up of people in the places you would expect in the government, the mayor's office, OCTO, the Office of Open Government, the general services procurement people, AG, and people who are knowledgeable in information technology, security, and records management and retention and stuff like that. People like us who are knowledgeable about transparency. So if the Police Reform Commission, in fact, managed to get the council's buy-in. I mean, you have to have the buy-in of the mayor or the council, or preferably both, but I suspect we're more likely to get buy-in from the council than the current mayor. So if they're going to buy into it to pass this, create this commission and appropriate something like almost $500,000 to fund it for a year or 2 years, then one would hope that they would be receptive, as they were to the Police Reform Commission stuff, to implement it. And keep in mind, with the Police Reform Commission, they bought in and they implemented a lot of it over the mayor's opposition.
Well,
I will also just really quick, a story from the Public Records Advisory Council that I worked on in Oregon. Part of the reason that I removed cities and localities from that requirement for reporting was because that neutralized opposition on the council. And then I had unanimous support. And then I knew it was more likely to actually pass in the legislature. If you can neutralize your opposition at that first base entry level, you're going to do better when you pitch that to whoever is legislating. And, you know, if you think you can put together a grassroots movement on, you know, open government, I would welcome you to do it. But I think that a report coming out of a commission that's a multi-stakeholder body where you've done the work at the ground level to neutralize potential opposition on that council is far more likely to actually get something passed. It may not be the exact thing that you want to be passed. It will probably be a compromise, but it will be something as opposed to nothing.
well, and it does give you something concrete to mobilize a community around, and visible.
And something that's already been vetted by some of the people who would be lobbying against you when you take it to whoever's passing the legislation.
Last comments from anyone on the panel here?
I love the rating system idea. I'm just going to put that out there. I love it, love it, love it. I would love to see it in place. Did you just check that right now? You did, didn't you?
Miranda, louder.
How was the message conveyed to you? You keep saying in capsule voice, I was told, was it the chief of staff? Was it the general counsel?
The general counsel of the governor's office, who then, interesting postscript to this story, right before my resignation, was appointed to be an appeals court judge, despite having no actual litigation experience and being the person who was supposed to appoint appeals court judges. And they took no other applicants and the governor just appointed him. So I resigned and I named him in the documents. I'm not going to name him here because I don't want to get in trouble, but you can look it up online. And he had to resign his appointment to be an appeals court judge because someone who abuses their authority that way really shouldn't be an appeals court judge. But yeah, I mean, he told me outright, we are your supervisors. You are to serve the governor's interests. It was him and one other subordinate with him who were in those meetings. And it's detailed. I took memos, contemporaneous memos at the time. So the names are out there, but I won't name them. One of them has been involved in another public records scandal since then.
Okay, Kirsten, you want to wind us up? Right on time.
Round of applause for our. Thank you. I think we did it. I think we,
Oh, sorry. Yeah, I was gonna say, I think we did it. We started globally and we really honed in on what's going on here in DC. So, thank you, everyone, and I hope, I'd be real interested in sort of tying what Daniel talked about with the National Action Plan with sort of what's going on here, and maybe there can be some synergy on that in the future.
DC could join OGP like New York.
And Austin and LA, yes. So we will take that under consideration. But,
Joining us.
thank you.